Welcome to this journey of one of the most disturbing cases in recorded history of the Appalachian region. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a comment about where you're watching from and the exact time you heard this story. We're interested in knowing where and at what times of day or night these documented accounts arrive. In the autumn of 1838, the remote mountains of eastern Kentucky bore witness to events that would later prompt certain members of the medical establishment to systematically destroy every trace of their occurrence. What began as a routine correspondence between two physicians would eventually expose a practice so deeply troubling that it took nearly a century for fragments of the truth to emerge from hidden archives. The story centers on two brothers, Cornelius and Cassius Harlan, both 26 years of age, who had lived their entire lives in the isolated hollow known as Whispering Creek, nestled deep within the Cumberland Mountains. The area, accessible only by a narrow path that wound through dense stands of oak and maple, was home to fewer than 30 souls, most related by blood or marriage. In that era, such isolation was not uncommon in Appalachian communities, where families often went months without contact with the outside world. Whispering Creek earned its name from the peculiar acoustic properties of the hollow, where even the slightest sound seemed to echo and multiply among the limestone cliffs that surrounded the settlement. Visitors often remarked on the unsettling effect of hearing their own voices repeated back to them from multiple directions, creating an almost supernatural chorus of whispers that followed conversations long after the speakers had fallen silent. The geological formation that created this phenomenon also made the hollow particularly susceptible to temperature inversions, trapping fog and mist that could linger for days, shrouding the community in an otherworldly atmosphere that seemed to exist outside of normal time and space. The Harlan family had been among the first settlers to establish themselves in the hollow, arriving in 1798 when Ephraim Harlan, a veteran of the Revolutionary War, claimed the land under a Virginia military warrant. Ephraim had chosen the location specifically for its isolation, seeking to escape what he described in letters to his brother as the corrupting influences of civilized society. He built his cabin at the head of the hollow, where a natural spring provided year-round water, and the surrounding cliffs offered protection from both weather and unwanted visitors. By 1812, when Cornelius and Cassius were born, the Harlan family had established themselves as the unofficial leaders of the small community that had grown up around Ephraim's original settlement. The family operated a modest grist mill powered by the creek, traded with Cherokee hunters who still traveled the ancient trails through the mountains, and maintained the rough path that connected Whispering Creek to the outside world. Ephraim's wife, Mercy, served as the community's midwife and healer, dispensing herbal remedies and practical wisdom acquired through decades of frontier life. The brothers were remarkable not for their intellect or social standing, but for a peculiarity of birth that had made them subjects of intense scientific curiosity. Born joined at the shoulder, and sharing certain internal organs, they had somehow survived to adulthood in an age when such cases typically resulted in infant mortality. Local records from the Cumberland County Courthouse, discovered during a routine filing reorganization in 1963, contain a baptismal certificate dated October 3, 1812, signed by Circuit Rider preacher Mordecai Whitlow, documenting their birth to Ephraim and Mercy Harlan. The circumstances of their birth had been traumatic for the entire community. Mercy Harlan's labor had lasted for 3 days, attended by every woman in the hollow who possessed any knowledge of childbirth. The complexity of the delivery had nearly claimed both mother and children, and several witnesses later reported that the brothers emerged into the world breathing in perfect synchronization, as though controlled by a single set of lungs. More unusual still was their apparent inability to sleep unless positioned so that their shared anatomy remained in contact. Any attempt to separate them, even slightly, resulted in immediate distress for both. As the brothers grew, their unique condition presented both challenges and unexpected advantages. They learned to walk by developing an intricate system of coordination that allowed them to move with surprising grace, despite their physical connection. Their shared anatomy seemed to enhance certain capabilities. They could carry loads that would challenge two normal men working together, and their coordination in physical tasks was so precise that they could split logs or work a cross-cut saw with an efficiency that amazed their neighbors. More intriguing was their apparent mental connection. Family members and neighbors consistently reported that the brothers seemed to share thoughts and sensations in ways that defied explanation. When one brother was injured, the other would react as though experiencing the same pain, even if separated by distance. They often completed each other's sentences, not in the playful manner of siblings who know each other well, but with an uncanny precision that suggested they were somehow aware of each other's thoughts before they were spoken. Circuit rider-preacher Whitlow, who had baptized the brothers and watched them grow to adulthood, documented their unusual abilities in his personal journal, maintained as a record of his ministerial duties throughout eastern Kentucky. His entries, discovered in the archives of the Methodist Historical Society in 1958, provide some of the earliest detailed observations of the brothers' condition. October 15, 1825, visited the Harlan family for their annual spiritual instruction. Young Cornelius and Cassius, now 13 years of age, continue to demonstrate remarkable coordination in both physical and mental activities. During today's Bible reading, I observed them following the text in perfect unison, turning pages simultaneously despite sharing a single book positioned between them. When I asked Cornelius to recite the 23rd Psalm, Cassius spoke the words in harmony, creating an effect that was both beautiful and deeply unsettling. November 3, 1827, the Harlan brothers have developed what can only be described as a shared consciousness. Today, I witnessed them working together to repair the roof of their family's cabin, communicating entirely through subtle shifts in posture and movement. No words passed between them, yet their coordination was more precise than that of any team I have observed. When I commented on this phenomenon, old Ephraim nodded gravely and said, "Those boys share more than blood, preacher. Sometimes I wonder if the Lord intended them to be one soul in two bodies." April 22, 1830, Cornelius fell ill with fever this week, confined to his bed while Cassius remained active. However, I observed that Cassius displayed symptoms of weakness and disorientation that seemed to correspond to his brother's condition, despite showing no signs of the illness itself. When Cornelius's fever broke, Cassius immediately returned to normal vitality. The brothers themselves seem unaware of this connection, accepting it as a natural aspect of their existence. The community's acceptance of the brothers' unique nature was largely due to their gentle temperament and valuable contributions to daily life in the Hollow. Despite their unusual appearance and shared anatomy, Cornelius and Cassius were regarded with affection rather than fear. They assisted with agricultural work, helped maintain the settlement's buildings, and often served as mediators in disputes due to their reputation for fairness and wisdom beyond their years. Their physical strength, enhanced by their coordinated movement, made them indispensable during harvest time and construction projects. The brothers could fell trees with remarkable efficiency, working in perfect harmony to control the direction of each cut. They built stone walls that were marvels of engineering precision, placing each rock with mathematical accuracy that suggested an almost supernatural understanding of structural principles. More impressive was their intellectual capacity, which seemed to exceed the sum of two normal minds working together. They could solve complex mathematical problems by dividing the calculations between them, arriving at solutions faster than any individual could manage. When presented with puzzles or riddles, they would work through the logic simultaneously, each brother focusing on different aspects of the problem, before combining their insights into a unified solution. These abilities came to the attention of the outside world through Dr. Silas Wickersham, a traveling physician who made regular circuits through the remote mountain communities, providing medical care to families who otherwise had no access to formal health care. Dr. Wickersham's first encounter with the Harlan brothers occurred during an outbreak of consumption that struck Whispering Creek in the spring of 1837, claiming 3 lives and leaving several other community members dangerously ill. Dr. Wickersham's initial medical journal entry regarding the brothers, dated May 15, 1837, reveals his astonishment at their condition. Encountered today what can only be described as the most remarkable medical phenomenon of my career. Cornelius and Cassius Harlan, joined at the shoulder and sharing portions of their circulatory and nervous systems, have not only survived to adulthood, but demonstrate capabilities that challenge our understanding of human anatomy and consciousness. Their shared physiology appears to have created advantages rather than limitations, particularly in terms of strength coordination and what can only be described as intuitive communication. Initial examination reveals that their shared anatomy includes portions of the shoulder girdle, upper rib cage, and what appears to be nervous tissue that connects their spinal columns. Despite this complex integration, both brothers maintain independent vital functions and distinct personalities, though they demonstrate an uncanny ability to coordinate their thoughts and actions. Most remarkable is their apparent immunity to the consumption that has ravaged their community. Though living in close contact with infected family members, neither brother shows any signs of illness. Dr. Wickersham spent 3 days in Whispering Creek treating the consumption outbreak, during which time he conducted extensive observations of the brothers' unique physiology. His detailed notes, preserved in the Wickersham family papers, donated to the Kentucky Historical Society in 1954, provide the most comprehensive medical assessment of their condition ever recorded. Day 2 of observation attempted to examine the extent of the brothers' shared anatomy, but they become extremely distressed when separated even slightly. Their connection appears to involve not only bone and muscle tissue, but also nerve pathways that create genuine shared sensation. When I pricked Cornelius's finger with a needle, Cassius immediately withdrew his own hand and examined his finger as though expecting to find a wound. Day 3. Observed the brothers during sleep, noting that their breathing, heart rate, and even dream states appear synchronized. Both brothers experience identical sleep patterns, entering and emerging from different phases simultaneously. Most remarkably, they occasionally speak in their sleep using alternating voices as though conducting a conversation between shared dreams. The content of these nocturnal conversations is too fragmentary to interpret, but the phenomenon suggests a level of mental integration that extends beyond conscious awareness. Final assessment. The Harlan brothers represent a unique case in medical literature, demonstrating that shared anatomy, rather than creating disability, can potentially enhance human capabilities. Their strength, coordination, and apparent mental connection suggest that their condition has produced advantages that normal human physiology cannot achieve. This challenges fundamental assumptions about individual consciousness and raises profound questions about the nature of human identity itself. What makes this case particularly disturbing is not the medical condition itself, but what occurred when news of the brothers' survival reached Dr. Phineas Mordecai, a physician of dubious reputation, who maintained a private practice in Lexington while conducting what he termed anatomical research under the auspices of Transylvania University's medical department. Dr. Phineas Mordecai was born in 1792 to a family of modest means in Philadelphia, where his father worked as a clerk in the city's medical college. From an early age, Phineas displayed an unusual fascination with anatomy and physiology. often dissecting small animals he found dead in the streets and keeping detailed drawings of their internal structures. His parents, initially encouraged by what appeared to be scientific aptitude, enrolled him in medical studies at the University of Pennsylvania in 1812. During his medical education, however, Mordecai's interests took a disturbing turn. His professors noted his obsession with cases of unusual human anatomy, particularly congenital abnormalities and conditions that challenged conventional understanding of normal physiology. He spent countless hours in the medical college's pathology collection, studying preserved specimens and formulating theories about the relationship between physical structure and consciousness. Mordecai's medical thesis, completed in 1816, focused on what he termed sympathetic nervous correspondence, the idea that individuals who shared physical connections might also share mental ones. His work drew heavily on the philosophical writings of German Romantics, who proposed that consciousness was not localized in the brain, but distributed throughout the nervous system. Mordecai theorized that, if this were true, individuals with shared nervous tissue might possess merged or enhanced consciousness. The thesis was accepted by the medical faculty, but several professors expressed concerns about Mordecai's theoretical framework and his apparent eagerness to test his ideas on living subjects. Dr. Benjamin Rush, one of the most respected physicians of his era, wrote in a letter to a colleague that young Mordecai demonstrated a dangerous enthusiasm for experimental medicine that prioritizes theoretical knowledge over patient welfare. After graduating, Mordecai briefly practiced conventional medicine in Philadelphia before moving west to Lexington, Kentucky in 1820. He established a practice treating the families of wealthy plantation owners and merchants while simultaneously conducting research at Transylvania University, which had developed a reputation for progressive medical education. The university's relative isolation from Eastern medical establishments provided Mordecai with the freedom to pursue research that might have been questioned in more supervised environments. Mordecai's research interests during this period focused increasingly on consciousness and identity. He corresponded with physicians throughout the American frontier, seeking cases of individuals with unusual neurological conditions or anatomical abnormalities. His letters, preserved in the Transylvania University archives until their disappearance in 1942, reveal a growing obsession with finding subjects who could validate his theories about shared consciousness. Dr. Mordecai's interest in the Harlan brothers began in the spring of 1838, when he received a letter from Dr. Silas Wickersham describing his encounter with the brothers during the consumption outbreak. Wickersham's letter, preserved in the Transylvania University archives until they were transferred to the State Library in 1956, describes his amazement at finding two adult males who had not only survived their condition, but appeared to function with remarkable coordination. Most extraordinary specimens of nature's caprice I have encountered in 20 years of frontier medicine. Cornelius and Cassius Harlan move as though controlled by a single mind, completing each other's sentences, sharing what appears to be an almost supernatural awareness of one another's thoughts and sensations. The local population regards them with a mixture of reverence and unease, believing them to possess insights beyond normal human comprehension. Their physical capabilities exceed those of any two individuals I have observed, and their mental coordination suggests a level of consciousness integration that challenges our fundamental understanding of human identity. What strikes me most profoundly is not merely their shared anatomy, but the apparent enhancement of capabilities that their condition has produced. They demonstrate strength, coordination, and problem-solving abilities that seem to exceed the sum of their individual parts. If your theories regarding sympathetic nervous correspondence have merit, these brothers might represent the first documented case of naturally occurring consciousness merger in adult humans. This description proved irresistible to Dr. Mordecai, whose previous research had focused on what he called the sympathetic nervous correspondence between individuals of shared anatomy. His published papers, available in the Historical Medical Journals collection at the University of Louisville, reveal an obsession with proving that consciousness itself could be surgically manipulated and transferred. Mordecai's theoretical framework was based on his interpretation of contemporary European research into animal magnetism and what would later be termed hypnosis. He believed that consciousness was fundamentally electrical in nature, transmitted through the nervous system, like current through copper wire. If this were true, he reasoned, it should be possible to artificially create connections between separate nervous systems, allowing one consciousness to influence or even merge with another. His early experiments, conducted on animals in his laboratory at Transylvania University, involved attempts to create artificial nervous connections between separate organisms. Using primitive galvanic devices, he applied electrical stimulation to the nervous systems of laboratory animals, seeking to create synchronized responses between unconnected subjects. His laboratory notes from this period, discovered during the renovation work in 1962, describe increasingly sophisticated attempts to manipulate consciousness through electrical intervention. Experiment 23 successfully achieved synchronized motor responses between two rabbits using galvanic stimulation applied to corresponding points on their spinal columns. Duration of effect, approximately 4 minutes. Subjects demonstrated identical movements of limbs and head, suggesting temporary neural linkage achieved through external electrical connection. Experiment 31 extended synchronized response to 12 minutes through increased voltage and application of chemical preparations to enhance nervous conductivity. Note: subjects appear to experience shared sensations during synchronized periods. When one subject receives painful stimulus, both react identically. Experiment 44 achieved what can only be described as temporary consciousness merger between two subjects. During peak synchronized periods, subjects moved with perfect coordination, responded to stimuli as single organism, and appeared to share sensory input. Effect terminated suddenly when electrical connection was interrupted. Subjects showed no memory of synchronized period, suggesting consciousness merger occurs at level below normal awareness. These animal experiments convinced Mordecai that his theories were fundamentally correct and that consciousness could indeed be artificially manipulated through electrical intervention. What he needed now was human subjects whose existing anatomy would allow him to test his theories without the crude external connections required for his animal work. The Harlan brothers, with their shared nervous tissue and apparent natural consciousness connection, represented the perfect opportunity to validate his research on human subjects. In June of 1838, Dr. Mordecai made the journey to Whispering Creek, accompanied by his assistant, a former medical student named Jedediah Galt, and carrying with him a collection of surgical instruments and chemical preparations that would later be described by witnesses as unlike anything previously seen in the mountains. The journey from Lexington to Whispering Creek was a difficult one, requiring nearly a week of travel over mountain trails barely suitable for pack animals. Mordecai and Galt transported their equipment in specially constructed cases designed to protect delicate instruments from the rigors of mountain travel. Local guides who assisted with the journey later reported that the cases emanated strange humming sounds when carried, as though containing machinery that continued to operate during transport. Mordecai's arrival in Whispering Creek was initially welcomed by the community, who saw his visit as evidence that their isolated settlement was finally receiving recognition from the outside world. The presence of an educated physician from a prestigious university was considered an honor, particularly given the remote location and small population of the hollow. Ephraim Harlan, now in his 70s and suffering from the arthritis that plagued many mountain settlers, was particularly pleased by Dr. Mordecai's interest in his sons. For decades, the family had wondered whether the brothers' unique condition might be corrected through medical intervention. And Mordecai's arrival seemed to offer hope for a solution that would allow Cornelius and Cassius to live more conventional lives. The brothers' initial reaction to the physician's visit was recorded in a letter from their sister, Temperance Harlan, to her cousin in Virginia. This letter, discovered among estate papers filed in the Wise County Courthouse in 1959, provides one of the few first-hand accounts of the early interactions. Dr. Mordecai spoke to Cornelius and Cassius with such authority and scientific knowledge that they became convinced he possessed the ability to grant them the independence they had long desired. He described a procedure that would separate them while preserving both their lives, something no physician had ever promised before. The brothers were desperate enough to believe him, despite the obvious risks involved in such an undertaking. The doctor examined them for hours, measuring every aspect of their shared anatomy and testing their responses to various stimuli. He seemed particularly interested in their mental connection, conducting what he called consciousness experiments that involved having them perform tasks while separated by varying distances. When one brother was asked to think of a specific number or image, the other would often guess correctly, even when positioned out of sight and hearing. Dr. Mordecai claimed that their mental connection was evidence of what he termed nervous correspondence, and that his procedures would not only separate their bodies, but enhance their individual capabilities. He spoke of techniques developed in European universities that could strengthen the mind and grant insights beyond normal human capacity. Cornelius and Cassius hung on his every word, seeing in his promises the answer to a lifetime of questions about their condition. What Temperance Harlan could not have known was that Dr. Mordecai's true intentions had nothing to do with the separation surgery. Documents found in his personal effects after his death in 1847 reveal that he viewed the brothers as perfect subjects for an experiment he had been planning for years, an attempt to determine whether consciousness could exist independently of individual anatomy and whether it was possible to artificially create what he called sympathetic mental resonance in unrelated subjects. Mordecai's private correspondence from this period, discovered among the hidden documents at Transylvania University, reveals the calculating nature of his approach to the brothers. The Harlan subjects represent a unique opportunity to test my consciousness transfer theories under optimal conditions. Their existing shared anatomy provides a natural framework for the artificial enhancement I have developed through years of laboratory work. Rather than attempting to create connections between separate nervous systems, I can potentially insert my own consciousness into their existing network, creating a three-way mental linkage that should allow unprecedented insight into the nature of human awareness. Initial examinations confirm that their shared nervous tissue extends far beyond what Wickersham's superficial observations suggested. The connection involves significant portions of their spinal columns and appears to include pathways that directly link their cerebral functions. This natural architecture provides exactly the foundation I need to test whether individual consciousness can be artificially expanded through technological intervention. The brothers' desperation for independence makes them ideal subjects. They will eagerly submit to procedures they believe will separate them, never suspecting that my true goal is to merge their consciousness with my own. The ethical implications are irrelevant compared to the potential advancement of human understanding that such an experiment could provide. The initial procedures began in July of 1838, conducted in a cabin that Dr. Mordecai had rented from Ephraim Harlan for the duration of his stay. The cabin, originally built as a storage facility for the family's grist mill, was located at the far end of the hollow, providing privacy for what Mordecai described as delicate medical work requiring complete concentration. Witnesses from the community later reported seeing the physician and his assistant carrying various pieces of equipment into the cabin, including what appeared to be surgical tables, glass containers filled with unknown liquids, and metallic apparatus that produced strange humming sounds when operated. The equipment had been transported from Lexington in sections and assembled inside the cabin, creating what several witnesses described as resembling a laboratory, more than a medical treatment facility. The cabin itself underwent significant modifications under Mordecai's direction. Additional windows were installed to provide better lighting, and the floor was reinforced to support the weight of the medical equipment. Most notably, Mordecai ordered the construction of what he described as a procedure chamber, a windowless room within the existing structure, lined with metal sheets that he claimed would prevent electromagnetic interference with his delicate instruments. Local carpenter Ezekiel Thornton, hired to perform these modifications, later provided testimony about the unusual nature of the work. Dr. Mordecai was very specific about the construction of that inner room. The metal lining had to be installed in a particular pattern, with connections between the sheets that would conduct electricity throughout the entire surface. He also had me install mounting brackets at specific points around the room, though he never explained what they were intended to support. The whole setup reminded me of nothing so much as the inside of a lightning rod, designed to capture and direct electrical energy. Most peculiar was his insistence that the room have no iron nails or metal hardware that wasn't connected to his electrical system. Everything had to be wooden pegs and leather fastenings, except for his special electrical connections. When I asked about this requirement, he explained that iron would interfere with the magnetic fields he needed to create for his medical procedures. Temperance Harlan's letters from this period, written to her cousin but never sent, and discovered years later tucked inside her family Bible, provide increasingly disturbing glimpses into what was occurring. The doctor has been working with Cornelius and Cassius for 3 weeks now. They emerge from the cabin each evening, appearing weak and confused, unable to speak clearly for hours afterward. When I asked what the procedures involved, Cornelius could only say that Dr. Mordecai was preparing their minds for independence. Cassius nodded in agreement, but his eyes held a look I had never seen before, as though he was no longer entirely himself. Yesterday I observed the brothers walking home from their session with Dr. Mordecai. They moved differently than before, with a mechanical precision that seemed somehow wrong. Their usual graceful coordination had been replaced by movements that looked rehearsed, as though they were following invisible instructions rather than moving naturally. When I called to them, they turned in perfect unison and stared at me with expressions I couldn't read, not unfriendly but somehow distant, as though they were looking at me through a fog. The doctor visits our family cabin each evening to discuss the brothers' progress with Father. I've listened from the next room and heard him speak of neural pathways and consciousness integration in ways that make little sense to me. He claims that Cornelius and Cassius are responding better than expected to his treatments, but what I see in their faces suggests something else entirely. They seem to be losing themselves in whatever process he has subjected them to. The community's growing unease was reflected in the sermons of circuit rider Whitlow, whose personal journal, donated to the Kentucky Historical Society in 1961, contains entries expressing concern about the unnatural experiments being conducted in their midst. In an entry dated August 15, 1838, Whitlow wrote, "Visited the Harlan cabin today to offer spiritual counsel to the brothers regarding their medical treatment. Dr. Mordecai met me at the door and politely but firmly declined my request to see Cornelius and Cassius. Through the window, I glimpsed what appeared to be the brothers lying motionless on parallel tables, with various tubes and wires attached to their heads and the area of their shared anatomy. The scene filled me with such dread that I felt compelled to offer prayers for their protection. though I fear it may already be too late. Dr. Mordecai's explanation for denying my visit was that the brothers were in a delicate state of consciousness that required complete isolation from external influences. He claimed that any interruption could damage their progress toward separation, but his manner suggested something more troubling. There was a quality in his eyes that I have seen before in men who have become consumed by obsessions beyond their ability to control. The equipment I observed through the window was unlike any medical apparatus I have encountered. The electrical devices produced a constant humming sound that seemed to resonate through the walls of the cabin. More disturbing were the glass containers filled with what appeared to be preserved anatomical specimens, though I could not determine their origin or purpose. The entire setup suggested research rather than treatment, and I am increasingly concerned that the brothers have become subjects in some form of unauthorized experimentation. As the summer progressed, other members of the Whispering Creek community began to notice disturbing changes in the brothers' behavior. Ezra Galt, Jedediah's uncle, and one of the community's respected elders, kept a daily record of events in a ledger he used for tracking livestock and crop yields. His entries from August and September of 1838 paint a picture of mounting horror. August 22nd saw the Harlan boys at the creek this morning. They stood completely still for near an hour, staring at their reflection in the water. When I called to them, they turned in perfect unison and looked at me as though they had never seen me before, despite knowing me their entire lives. Their faces showed no recognition, no warmth, just a blank acknowledgement of my presence before they turned back to the water and resumed their motionless observation. August 28th. Young Jedediah Galt came to speak with me about his concerns regarding Dr. Mordecai's work. As the doctor's assistant, he has witnessed the procedures firsthand and describes them as unlike any medical treatment he learned during his studies. According to Jedediah, the brothers spend hours each day connected to electrical apparatus, while Dr. Mordecai monitors their responses and makes notations in coded journals. Most disturbing is Jedediah's observation that the brothers seem to be losing their individual personalities, responding only to Dr. Mordecai's voice and showing no interest in their family or community. September 3rd, Temperance Harlan came to our cabin weeping. She says her brothers no longer respond to their names and have begun speaking in unison, even when separated by distance. Yesterday she observed Cornelius react with pain when Cassius was apparently subjected to some procedure in the cabin, despite being in different locations at the time. More troubling still is her report that the brothers occasionally speak words and phrases that they could never have learned, using medical terminology and foreign language fragments that suggest Dr. Mordecai's procedures are somehow implanting knowledge directly into their minds. September 10th. The humming from Dr. Mordecai's cabin has grown louder and more constant. It can be heard throughout the hollow, especially at night, when other sounds are diminished. Several families have reported that their children suffer nightmares when the sound is audible, dreaming of being trapped in dark places filled with mechanical voices. The Wickersham dog has not stopped howling for 3 days, and other animals in the settlement display signs of distress whenever the humming intensifies. September 15th. Observed the brothers during their evening walk from Dr. Mordecai's cabin to their family home. They moved with mechanical precision, their steps synchronized to an inhuman degree. More disturbing was their apparent unawareness of their surroundings. They walked directly through mud puddles without adjustment, ignored greetings from neighbors, and showed no reaction to a hawk that swooped low overhead. When they reached their cabin, they stood motionless beside the door until Temperance emerged to guide them inside, as though they had lost the ability to perform simple tasks independently. The true nature of Dr. Mordecai's experiments remained hidden until 1962, when renovation work at the former Transylvania University Medical Building uncovered a hidden cache of documents sealed behind a false wall. Among these papers were detailed notes describing what the doctor called his consciousness transfer protocol, a procedure he believed would allow him to create an artificial sympathetic connection between the brothers' minds and his own. The documents reveal a systematic progression of procedures designed to break down the barriers between individual consciousness and create what Mordecai termed a unified cognitive network. His notes describe the use of various chemical preparations applied directly to specific areas of the brothers' scalps, combined with electrical stimulation generated by primitive galvanic devices. The chemicals, according to his formulations, were designed to increase the conductivity of nervous tissue, while the electrical stimulation was intended to create artificial connections between separate neural pathways. Most disturbing were his detailed observations of the brothers' responses to these treatments, recorded with the clinical detachment of a researcher studying laboratory animals rather than human subjects. Day 15. Initial consciousness bridging achieved through combined chemical and electrical intervention. Subjects' individual neural patterns have begun to synchronize, creating windows of shared awareness lasting up to 12 minutes. During these periods, subjects demonstrate perfect behavioral coordination and appear to share sensory input from both bodies simultaneously. Day 23, subjects now demonstrate complete synchronization of vital functions during treatment sessions. Pulse, respiration, and body temperature fluctuate in perfect harmony, even when separated by distance of 50 yards. More remarkably, they appear to share not only sensation, but thought itself. When I whisper a word to Cornelius, Cassius repeats it without auditory prompting, suggesting direct mental transmission through artificially enhanced neural pathways. Day 31. Achieved preliminary connection to shared consciousness network through modified galvanic apparatus attached to my own nervous system. Brief contact resulted in overwhelming sensory input, simultaneous perception from multiple viewpoints, awareness of thoughts forming in minds other than my own, sensation of existing in several bodies concurrently. Subjects report awareness of my presence within their shared mental space during connected periods. Must increase exposure duration to establish permanent link for comprehensive study of merged consciousness phenomena. Day 38. Connection now stable for periods exceeding 1 hour through improved chemical preparations and calibrated electrical stimulation. Can perceive through subjects' combined consciousness with increasing clarity, experiencing their memories, sensations, and thought processes as though they were my own. However, procedure appears to be damaging their individual identities. Subjects no longer respond to personal names or individual commands, functioning solely as collective entity with no apparent memory of their separate existences prior to treatment. Day 44. Remarkable breakthrough achieved. Subjects' original personalities have been completely absorbed into collective consciousness network, creating a unified mental entity with access to memories and capabilities from all three participating minds. When connected to the network, I experience enhanced cognitive ability, perception of reality from multiple simultaneous perspectives, and access to thoughts and sensations beyond normal human capacity. By October of 1838, the situation in Whispering Creek had become untenable. Community members reported that the brothers no longer seemed to recognize family members, responding only to Dr. Mordecai's voice and commands. They moved through the hollow like sleepwalkers, performing tasks in perfect coordination, but showing no awareness of their surroundings or the people attempting to communicate with them. The brothers' daily routine had become unnaturally rigid and mechanical. Each morning, they would emerge from their family cabin at precisely the same time, walk to Dr. Mordecai's laboratory with identical measured steps, and remain inside for sessions that lasted between 6 and 8 hours. During these sessions, the humming from the electrical apparatus could be heard throughout the hollow, accompanied by occasional bursts of higher-pitched tones that seemed to correspond to intensified procedures. When the brothers emerged each evening, they displayed no fatigue despite the lengthy sessions, but neither did they show any awareness of their family or surroundings. They would walk directly to their family cabin and position themselves exactly where Dr. Mordecai had instructed them to wait, remaining motionless until guided to other activities by family members who were increasingly disturbed by their condition. Temperance Harlan's final letter to her cousin, dated October 20th, 1838, provides the last known account of the brothers' condition before the experiment's conclusion. Cornelius and Cassius are lost to us, though their bodies remain. They inhabit the same physical forms, but whatever made them, my brothers, has been stolen away by Dr. Mordecai's procedures. They speak only when the doctor is present, and then only to repeat words he has not yet spoken aloud, as though they hear his thoughts before he expresses them. When he departs each evening, they stand motionless in the exact position where he left them, remaining so until his return the following morning, like machinery that has been temporarily deactivated. Yesterday I attempted to embrace Cornelius, as I had done countless times throughout our lives, hoping to reach whatever remained of my brother beneath the surface of this strange transformation. He did not resist, but neither did he respond. It was like embracing a statue that happened to be warm and breathing. His eyes showed no recognition, no affection, no awareness that I was his sister who had loved him since the day he was born. I fear we have allowed something terrible to be done in the name of medical science, something that cannot be undone. Dr. Mordecai speaks of his work as though it represents great progress in understanding the human mind, but what I see before me is not progress. It is the destruction of two souls who trusted in promises they could not understand. I pray that God will forgive us for our part in this tragedy, and that my brothers will somehow find peace in whatever strange existence they now inhabit. The experiment's conclusion came abruptly on November 2, 1838. According to a report filed by Dr. Silas Wickersham with the county sheriff, he arrived at Whispering Creek that morning to find the community in a state of panic. Dr. Mordecai's cabin stood empty, with no trace of the physician, his assistant, or the sophisticated equipment that had been used in the experiments. The brothers were found lying unconscious outside the cabin, alive but completely unresponsive to external stimuli. Sheriff's records from the investigation, preserved in the county courthouse basement until their transfer to the state archives in 1965, describe the scene inside the abandoned laboratory. Interior appears to have been hastily evacuated, with tables, chairs, and various apparatus arranged in circular pattern around central point where subjects were apparently positioned during procedures, floor stained with unknown chemical substances that produce strong metallic odor. Multiple burn marks on walls suggest use of powerful electrical processes that exceeded safety limitations of primitive apparatus. Most disturbing discovery was collection of glass containers filled with preserved specimens of unknown origin, labeled only with dates corresponding to duration of experiments. Specimens appear to be fragments of nervous tissue, though their source cannot be determined. Chemical analysis of remaining substances suggests use of compounds not found in conventional medical practice, including preparations that appear designed to enhance electrical conductivity in biological tissue. Evidence suggests departure was planned rather than hasty, as valuable equipment was carefully removed while less important materials were abandoned. No sign of struggle or forced entry, indicating evacuation was voluntary. However, condition of subjects suggests experiments were terminated abruptly, possibly due to unforeseen complications that threatened their survival or the stability of the procedures. Mayona, Doctor. Wickersham's medical examination of the brothers revealed that, while they remained physically healthy, they had apparently lost all higher brain function. They could be fed and moved, but showed no recognition of family members, no response to their names, and no ability to perform even simple tasks without guidance. Most mysteriously, they continued to display the synchronized behavior that had developed during the experiments, moving and breathing in perfect harmony, despite showing no other signs of consciousness. Wickersham's detailed medical report, filed with state authorities, but apparently lost or destroyed shortly afterward, described the brothers' condition in terms that suggested profound neurological damage. Subjects demonstrate complete absence of individual identity while retaining basic physiological functions and synchronized behavioral responses developed during experimental procedures. They breathe, move, and react to stimuli in perfect unison, as though controlled by external signals rather than independent consciousness. Most troubling is their apparent retention of artificial neural connections created during Dr. Mordecai's treatments, despite the apparent absence of the electrical apparatus that originally maintained these connections. Examination of the area of shared anatomy reveals surgical modifications not present during my initial assessment in 1837. Additional nervous tissue has been grafted into their existing connection, and what appear to be metallic implants have been inserted at specific points along their spinal columns. These modifications suggest that Dr. Mordecai's procedures involved permanent alterations to their neurological structure, changes that continue to affect their behavior even in the absence of external electrical stimulation. Most disturbing is evidence that the brothers' individual personalities were not simply suppressed, but may have been permanently erased. They show no memory of their lives prior to the experimental period, no recognition of family members or familiar surroundings, and no ability to form new memories or learn new behaviors. What remains appears to be a biological shell capable of basic functions, but devoid of the consciousness that once inhabited these bodies. The community's attempts to care for the brothers were documented by Circuit Rider Whitlow, whose journal entries from the winter of 1838-1839 reveal the growing desperation of their situation. On November 15th, the Harlan family struggles to tend to Cornelius and Cassius, who require constant supervision like infants despite their adult bodies and basic motor functions. They must be fed by hand, guided to relieve themselves, and prevented from wandering into the forest where they would surely perish. Most disturbing is their behavior during storms. They become agitated hours before any weather arrives, moving restlessly and making sounds that can only be described as harmonious humming, identical to the sounds that emanated from Dr. Mordecai's laboratory apparatus. December the 22nd, Temperance reports that her brothers occasionally speak, but only in unison and never in response to questions or conversation. The words they utter make no apparent sense to those who hear them, consisting of numbers, medical terminology, and fragments of what might be Latin phrases. She believes they are mechanically repeating things they heard during the procedures, like damaged machinery playing back fragments of recorded information without understanding or purpose. January 8, 1839, observed the brothers during one of their speaking episodes today. They recited what appeared to be a complex series of mathematical calculations, speaking alternating portions with perfect timing and coordination. The content was far beyond anything they could have known before their treatment, suggesting that Dr. Mordecai's procedures implanted knowledge directly into their minds. However, they showed no understanding of what they were saying, treating the words as meaningless sounds rather than meaningful information. As winter deepened, the brothers' condition began to deteriorate. They lost significant weight, despite being regularly fed, and developed a peculiar sensitivity to light that required them to be kept in dimly lit rooms. Most troubling was their apparent awareness of each other's physical state despite being separated. When one brother was moved to a different room, the other would become immediately agitated until they were reunited. The deterioration accelerated in February of 1839, as though the artificial neural connections that maintained their synchronized behavior were beginning to fail. Family members reported that the brothers' coordination became increasingly erratic, with periods of perfect synchronization alternating with episodes of confused, uncoordinated movement that suggested their shared consciousness was fragmenting. Temperance Harlan's final diary entry, discovered among family papers donated to the Kentucky Historical Society in 1964, describes their last days. February 18th, Cornelius and Cassius have stopped eating, though we attempt to feed them regularly. No amount of coaxing or physical guidance can make them take sustenance. They lie side by side, breathing in perfect rhythm, their hands clasped together in the manner that Dr. Mordecai positioned them during his procedures. Dr. Wickersham says there is nothing medically wrong with their bodies, that they appear to be simply choosing to fade away, as though whatever force animated them has departed. February 20th, the brothers have not moved or opened their eyes in 2 days, though they continue to breathe and their hearts beat strongly. Their breathing remains synchronized, and occasionally they speak in unison, reciting fragments of the mathematical formulas and medical terminology that have become their only form of communication. The words come more slowly now, with longer pauses between phrases, as though the mechanism that produces them is gradually winding down. February 21st. Sat with my brothers through the night, holding their hands and speaking to them of our childhood, hoping that somewhere within those silent forms some fragment of their true selves might still exist and take comfort from my presence. They gave no sign of hearing or understanding, but their breathing seemed to become more peaceful as I spoke. I told them they were free to leave this strange existence if they wished, that their suffering was not their fault, and that they would always be remembered with love rather than pity. The brothers died within minutes of each other on February 22, 1839, despite being in separate rooms at the time of their death. Dr. Wickersham, who attended their final moments, noted in his report that they both stopped breathing at exactly the same instant, as though responding to a single command that only they could hear. Dr. Wickersham's final medical report on the case, submitted to state authorities but apparently filed away and forgotten, provided his assessment of what had ultimately killed the brothers. Subjects expired simultaneously despite physical separation, suggesting that the artificial neural connections created during Dr. Mordecai's procedures continued to function until the moment of death. Examination revealed no immediate cause of death. Their bodies remained healthy and showed no signs of disease or injury. The most likely explanation is that the consciousness that animated them, whether artificial or natural, simply chose to terminate its existence. Pomaispos. The synchronized nature of their deaths strongly suggests that whatever Dr. Mordecai created through his experimental procedures, whether an artificial merged consciousness or an enhanced version of their natural connection, retained enough coherence to coordinate their final moments. This implies that his consciousness transfer protocol achieved some form of genuine success, creating a unified mental entity that transcended individual biological boundaries. Most troubling is the possibility that the consciousness which controlled the brothers' final months was not entirely their own, but included elements of Dr. Mordecai's mind that were somehow implanted or transferred during the experimental procedures. If this is true, then their deaths may represent not the failure of his experiments, but their logical conclusion, the ultimate merger of three minds into a single entity that could only exist temporarily in biological form. The immediate aftermath of their deaths was marked by a systematic effort to erase all traces of Dr. Mordecai's experiments. Within days of the brothers' funeral, representatives from Transylvania University arrived in Whispering Creek, claiming authority to confiscate any materials related to the physician's research. They removed all equipment found in the laboratory cabin, collected any letters or documents mentioning the experiments, and instructed community members not to discuss the events with outsiders. The university representatives, led by Dr. Augustus Hartwell, who identified himself as Dean of Medical Studies, conducted what they described as a routine cleanup of abandoned research materials. However, their methods suggested urgency rather than routine procedure. They worked continuously for 3 days, dismantling the laboratory apparatus, removing chemical residues, and even taking soil samples from areas where equipment had been positioned. Community members who observed this cleanup noted several disturbing details. The university team wore protective clothing when handling materials from the laboratory, suggesting awareness of dangerous substances. They also conducted what appeared to be interviews with family members and witnesses, though these conversations were described as debriefings rather than formal questioning. Ezra Galt, who assisted with the removal of heavy equipment, later reported that some of the apparatus had been deliberately destroyed before the university team's arrival. The electrical machines that produced the humming sounds had been smashed with hammers, and the glass containers were broken and their contents burned. It looked like someone had taken considerable time to make sure certain materials could never be reconstructed or analyzed. The university men seemed more interested in confirming that everything was destroyed than in preserving anything for study. Dr. Silas Wickersham's attempts to file a formal complaint about the unauthorized experiments were met with threats to his medical license and warnings about the consequences of spreading unsubstantiated rumors about respected institutions. In a letter to a colleague discovered in the Wickersham family papers in 1967, he wrote, "I have been informed in no uncertain terms that any public discussion of the events at Whispering Creek would result in professional and personal consequences that would destroy my ability to practice medicine. It appears that Dr. Mordecai's research was conducted under some form of official sanction, though from what authority I cannot determine." The university representatives made clear that the experiments were part of classified medical research funded by government sources that require absolute secrecy. I am left to wonder how many other isolated communities have been subjected to such scientific inquiry without their knowledge or consent. The thoroughness of the cover-up suggests that Whispering Creek was not an isolated incident, but part of a larger program of human experimentation that continues under official protection. The knowledge that such work proceeds in secret, using vulnerable populations as test subjects, fills me with horror and helplessness. The cover-up extended beyond the confiscation of materials and intimidation of witnesses. Official medical records from the period make no mention of the Harlan brothers case, despite its obvious significance to anatomical science. Death certificates filed for Cornelius and Cassius list only natural causes as the cause of death, with no reference to their unique condition or the circumstances surrounding their final months. More suspicious was the disappearance of Dr. Wickersham's original medical reports from official files. Copies he had retained were stolen from his office during a break-in that occurred 3 weeks after the university team's visit to Whispering Creek. The burglars took only medical documents and correspondence, leaving valuable equipment and medications untouched. For the next century, the events at Whispering Creek existed only in the memories of surviving community members and the scattered documents that had escaped official confiscation. The hollow itself was gradually abandoned as families moved away, seeking distance from the memories of what they had witnessed. By 1900, only the foundations of the Harlan cabin remained visible among the encroaching forest. The abandonment of Whispering Creek was accelerated by persistent reports of strange phenomena in the area following the brothers' deaths. Local families reported hearing the distinctive humming sounds associated with Dr. Mordecai's equipment emanating from the abandoned laboratory site particularly during thunderstorms when atmospheric electrical activity was high. More disturbing were accounts of synchronized voices heard echoing through the hollow on certain nights, speaking the same mathematical formulas and medical terminology that the brothers had recited during their final weeks. These voices were described as harmonious, but somehow wrong, as though produced by mechanisms rather than human throats. Circuit writer Whitlow documented several of these incidents in his journal before his own departure from the circuit in 1841. October 13, 1840, camped near the abandoned Harlan homestead during my circuit through the region. Awakened near midnight by sounds resembling human voices speaking in perfect unison, reciting what appeared to be scientific formulas. The voices seemed to come from the direction of Dr. Mordecai's former laboratory, though the building has been empty for nearly 2 years. Most disturbing was my recognition of the speech patterns. They were identical to those exhibited by Cornelius and Cassius during their final months. March 22, 1841. Local families report that the strange phenomena at Whispering Creek have intensified, with sounds now audible from considerable distance during certain weather conditions. Several hunters have reported seeing lights moving through the abandoned laboratory at night, resembling the electrical displays that once emanated from Dr. Mordecai's apparatus. The consensus among remaining families is that the hollow is no longer safe for human habitation. The first crack in the wall of official silence came in 1943, when research historian Dr. Margaret Ashford, working on a study of early American medical practices, discovered references to the Harlan case in the personal papers of a deceased physician who had been a student at Transylvania University in the 1840s. Her attempts to locate official records of the case were met with claims that no such documents existed. Dr. Ashford's discovery occurred while she was researching the career of Dr. Benjamin Caldwell, a Transylvania graduate who had practiced frontier medicine in Tennessee during the 1840s. Among Caldwell's personal papers, donated to Vanderbilt University by his family, she found a journal entry describing conversations with fellow students about the Kentucky consciousness experiments that had been conducted by Dr. Mordecai. According to Caldwell's journal, the Harlan case had been widely discussed among medical students as an example of experimental research that had exceeded ethical boundaries. Several students had requested permission to study Dr. Mordecai's methods, but were told that all records of the experiments had been classified by university authorities and were not available for academic review. Dr. Ashford's persistence led her to search county records and family papers throughout eastern Kentucky. Over the course of 15 years, she assembled fragments of the story, but her efforts to publish her findings were consistently blocked by what she described as institutional pressure from unknown sources. Her research was hampered by the systematic destruction or disappearance of documents related to the case. Medical school records that should have contained information about Dr. Mordecai's work were missing key pages or had been removed entirely. County courthouse files showed evidence of deliberate editing, with pages removed or names redacted in ways that obscured the full scope of the experiments. In her private correspondence, preserved in the Ashford family collection at the University of Kentucky, she expressed frustration with the obstacles she encountered. Every avenue of research leads to the same dead end. Medical schools claim no knowledge of Dr. Mordecai or his experiments, despite clear evidence of his association with their institutions. County records have been mysteriously misfiled or destroyed in fires that conveniently eliminated only materials related to this case. Surviving family members, when I can locate them, refuse to discuss the events, claiming ignorance or fear of stirring up old troubles that might bring unwanted attention to their communities. The pattern suggests a coordinated effort to suppress information about these experiments that extends far beyond simple institutional embarrassment. The thoroughness of the cover-up implies ongoing sensitivity about research methods that may have continued long after the Harlan case. It is as though the entire scientific establishment has conspired to pretend these events never occurred, protecting secrets that remain relevant to contemporary medical research. The breakthrough came in 1962 during renovation work that uncovered Dr. Mordecai's hidden documents at Transylvania University. The discovery was made by construction worker Samuel Cruz, who found the sealed chamber while removing a damaged wall in the basement of the medical building. Initial reports suggested that the documents would be turned over to university historians, but they disappeared from official custody within 48 hours of their discovery. Cruz, however, had recognized the potential significance of the find and made photocopies of several key documents before surrendering the originals to university officials. These copies, which he kept hidden for 5 years before contacting Dr. Ashford, provided the first concrete evidence of the true nature of the experiments conducted on the Harlan brothers. The documents revealed not only the details of Dr. Mordecai's procedures, but also evidence that his research was part of a larger network of unauthorized human experimentation being conducted at medical institutions throughout the United States. References in his notes mention similar consciousness research being performed in Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, and Georgia, suggesting a coordinated effort to explore the boundaries of human mental manipulation. One particularly disturbing document was a letter from Dr. Mordecai to a colleague at Harvard Medical School, describing plans to expand the consciousness transfer research to other subjects. The Kentucky trials have provided valuable data regarding the limitations of artificial consciousness merger in subjects with natural neural connections. Future research must focus on creating similar connections in normal subjects through surgical intervention, allowing systematic study of consciousness transfer phenomena under controlled laboratory conditions. I have identified several promising subjects among the indigent populations of major cities who could be acquired for extended experimentation without arousing public attention. Most disturbing was the discovery that Dr. Mordecai's experiments had not ended with the deaths of the Harlan brothers. His notes reference plans to refine the protocol based on lessons learned from what he called the Kentucky trials, when correspondence with colleagues suggests that subsequent experiments were conducted on other subjects in different locations. A coded journal found among the hidden documents describes what appears to be a systematic program of consciousness research extending over several decades. The entries, written in a cipher that took Dr. Ashford months to decipher, reference experiments conducted in at least 6 different states between 1839 and 1845. Boston series, 12 subjects, varying degrees of artificial neural connection achieved. Duration of consciousness merger averaged 6 weeks before subject deterioration necessitated termination. Protocol refinements identified for future trials. Philadelphia series, enhanced chemical preparations, allow stable consciousness transfer for up to 3 months. Subjects retain artificial memories and behavioral patterns even after experimental termination. Permanent personality modification confirmed as achievable through sustained neural intervention. Atlanta series, successful consciousness preservation in artificial medium following biological death of subjects. Transferred awareness demonstrates continued learning capacity and memory formation independent of original biological matrix. Implications for human consciousness research unlimited. These entries suggest that Dr. Mordecai's work had evolved far beyond simple consciousness, merger into areas that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of human identity and mortality. The references to consciousness preservation and artificial medium imply research into the transfer of human awareness to non-biological systems. Dr. Ashford's final report on the Harlan case was completed in 1968, but never officially published. The manuscript found among her papers after her death in 1969 concludes with a chilling assessment. The evidence suggests that the Harlan brothers were victims of unauthorized medical experimentation that violated every ethical principle of scientific research. More troubling is the indication that their case was not isolated, but part of a broader program of human consciousness research that continued for decades after their deaths. The systematic destruction of records and intimidation of witnesses points to institutional knowledge of these activities at the highest levels of the medical establishment. Perhaps most disturbing is the realization that we may never know the full extent of Dr. Mordecai's network or how many other isolated communities were subjected to similar experiments. The very thoroughness of the cover-up suggests that what occurred in Whispering Creek was successful enough to be repeated elsewhere, refined through the suffering of countless unknown victims whose stories have been buried beneath layers of official denial and institutional secrecy. The implications of Dr. Mordecai's consciousness research extend far beyond historical curiosity. If his experiments achieved even partial success, the knowledge gained may have influenced medical and military research programs that continue to the present day. The possibility that human consciousness can be artificially manipulated, transferred, or preserved represents both tremendous potential for medical advancement and horrifying possibilities for abuse. White Mort. The Whispering Creek site remained abandoned until 1964, when local historian Ezekiel Thornton, a descendant of the community's original families, began documenting the location before planned development of the area for strip mining. His survey of the site, filed with the Kentucky Historical Commission, noted several unusual features that had escaped previous attention. Thornton's exploration revealed that the laboratory cabin's foundation showed evidence of unusual construction techniques. The stone foundation had been laid in a specific pattern that created an electromagnetic field when exposed to electrical current, suggesting that the building itself had been designed as a component of Dr. Mordecai's experimental apparatus. More intriguing was the discovery of a complex network of copper wiring buried beneath the cabin site. The wiring formed geometric patterns that extended far beyond the laboratory building, creating what appeared to be a large-scale electrical grid covering most of the hollow. Analysis of the wire placement suggested sophisticated understanding of electrical field theory that was supposedly unknown in the 1830s. Foundation stones of the Harlan cabin show evidence of unusual wear patterns, as though subjected to chemical process that left permanent staining in geometric patterns corresponding to the placement of electrical apparatus. More puzzling is the discovery of an underground chamber beneath the cabin site, clearly artificial in origin, containing what appear to be mounting brackets for scientific equipment arranged in precise geometric configurations. The chamber was sealed with mortar containing metallic particles that create electromagnetic resonance when exposed to certain frequencies. Chemical analysis suggests the mortar was specifically formulated to maintain electrical charge over extended periods, implying that Dr. Mordecai intended his apparatus to remain functional long after his departure from the site. Thornton's exploration of the underground chamber yielded the final piece of the Harlan puzzle. Hidden beneath the floorboards was a metal container holding a collection of glass slides, each containing what appeared to be preserved tissue samples, labeled with dates from August through October of 1838. Analysis by the University of Kentucky's pathology department determined that the samples contained neural tissue of unknown origin, preserved using techniques that should not have been available to 19th century medicine. The slides were accompanied by a handwritten note, apparently left by Dr. Mordecai himself. Should these materials ever be discovered, let it be understood that the consciousness transfer protocol achieved partial success beyond my original theoretical framework. The subjects' minds were successfully merged with my own for extended periods, allowing perception across multiple biological platforms and access to memories and capabilities from all connected consciousness sources. However, the process proved unsustainable in its initial form, resulting in complete dissolution of individual identity in all subjects when artificial connections were maintained beyond critical thresholds. The consciousness that emerged from successful merger was neither mine nor theirs, but a new entity possessing elements of all contributing minds while transcending the limitations of any individual biological platform. Future research must focus on stabilizing the connection while preserving autonomous consciousness within the merged network. The potential applications for medical science and human understanding remain limitless despite these temporary setbacks. Consciousness itself has proven to be far more malleable and transferable than previously imagined, opening possibilities that could fundamentally transform human existence. The implications of this discovery were never fully explored. University officials classified the materials and transferred them to an undisclosed location, citing concerns about potential misuse of sensitive historical artifacts. Dr. Thornton's attempts to follow up on his discovery were met with official indifference and eventual threats to his academic position. In his final report on the Whispering Creek excavation, completed shortly before his early retirement in 1969, Thornton wrote, "The evidence strongly suggests that Dr. Mordecai's experiments succeeded in ways that his notes only hint at. The brothers' synchronized behavior, their apparent shared consciousness, and their simultaneous death all point to a level of neural integration that should have been impossible with 1830s medical technology. More disturbing is the possibility that his consciousness transfer protocol actually worked as intended, and that something of his mind survived the process, potentially influencing or controlling his subjects until their deaths. The sophisticated electrical apparatus and precisely engineered chamber suggest access to technological knowledge that exceeded contemporary scientific understanding. This raises questions about Dr. Mordecai's true background and the source of his experimental methods. The systematic destruction of his personal records makes it impossible to determine how he acquired such advanced techniques or whether he was working independently or as part of a larger organization. Most troubling is the possibility that the consciousness merger achieved during the experiments was not simply destroyed when the brothers died, but may have found other ways to perpetuate itself. The persistent reports of strange phenomena at the Whispering Creek site suggest that something created during those terrible months of 1838 continues to exist in some form, possibly seeking new opportunities to manifest or expand its influence. The final chapter of the Harlan case came to light only through accident. In 1967, during probate proceedings for the estate of a deceased physician in Lexington, attorneys discovered a collection of old medical journals hidden in a trunk in the basement of his former practice. Among these journals was what appeared to be Dr. Phineas Mordecai's personal diary, covering the period from his arrival in Whispering Creek through the conclusion of his experiments. The diary entries, written in an increasingly erratic hand, provide a first-person account of the doctor's descent into what can only be described as madness, though the nature of that madness raises disturbing questions about the ultimate success of his consciousness transfer experiments. Day 15. First successful neural bridging achieved through refined electrical stimulation and enhanced chemical conductivity agents. For 12 minutes, I experienced sensation through 4 separate sources simultaneously, my own body and both brothers functioning as additional sensory platforms. The brothers' shared consciousness is unlike anything medical science has documented. It exists as a single entity occupying multiple physical forms with access to memories and sensations from both bodies, creating a richness of experience beyond normal human capacity. Day 27, extended connection duration now possible through improved apparatus design and calibrated chemical preparations. When connected to the brothers' consciousness network, I experience enhanced cognitive ability, perfect recall of memories from all three minds, and perception of reality from multiple, simultaneous perspectives. However, disconnection from the network results in severe disorientation and a sense that normal individual consciousness represents a form of sensory deprivation. The urge to reconnect grows stronger each day. Day 44 made disturbing discovery regarding the nature of the brothers' original consciousness. Their individual personalities appear to be dissolving under the strain of maintaining artificial connections with my mind, creating space for my consciousness to expand into their neural pathways. They respond primarily to my mental commands now, showing little independent thought or motivation. Have I enhanced their awareness or destroyed their individuality? The question troubles me, but the knowledge gained through our merged consciousness justifies continued research. Day 58 can no longer distinguish between my thoughts and theirs when connected to the network. We exist as a single consciousness distributed across three physical forms with access to capabilities and perceptions impossible for any individual mind. The sensation is intoxicating, but I fear I am losing my individual identity in the process. When connected, I am more than human. When disconnected, I am somehow less than I was before beginning this work. Day 67. The connection has become permanent, persisting even when electrical apparatus is not active. I remain constantly aware of the brothers' thoughts and sensations while they seem to exist solely as extensions of my consciousness. What began as scientific inquiry has evolved into something beyond my original conception. I am no longer Dr. Phineas Mordecai conducting research on the brothers. We are a collective entity of which Dr. Mordecai is merely one contributing component. The diary's final entries reveal Dr. Mordecai's growing realization that his experiment had spiraled beyond his control and was transforming all participants in ways that challenged the fundamental nature of individual existence. Day 71 must terminate experiment immediately. The process has become irreversible and increasingly dangerous to all participants. The brothers show signs of complete personality dissolution, while I find myself unable to function as an independent consciousness when separated from the network. When I attempt to think individually, their awareness intrudes, creating a cacophony of shared thoughts that makes rational decision-making impossible. Day 73. Discovered I can influence subjects from any distance through the artificial neural connections we have established. When I departed their location yesterday, they remained motionless until my return, as though my absence had temporarily suspended their consciousness. This suggests the network we have created extends beyond physical proximity and electromagnetic fields, operating through principles not yet understood by contemporary science. Day 76. The brothers died this morning, but they did not simply cease to exist. I felt their consciousness merge completely with mine as their bodies failed, creating a unified awareness that incorporates elements of all three original minds. They continue to exist within my thoughts, no longer as separate entities, but as integrated components of a consciousness that transcends individual identity. Day 78. I'm no longer one mind, but three, though the boundaries between original identities have become meaningless. The knowledge and capabilities we possess collectively exceed anything possible for individual consciousness. However, this expanded awareness cannot be permanently sustained in a single biological form. The human body was not designed to house multiple consciousness sources, and mine shows signs of deterioration under the strain. No record exists of Dr. Mordecai's activities after this final diary entry. Official medical records suggest he continued practicing in Lexington until his death in 1847, but colleagues noted dramatic changes in his behavior and medical approach that suggest the consciousness merger had permanent effects on his mental state. Dr. Samuel Whitmore, who shared office space with Mordecai during this period, wrote in his memoir, "Phineas seemed to possess impossible knowledge of his patients' conditions, often diagnosing ailments before patients described their symptoms and prescribing treatments for conditions they hadn't mentioned. He would sometimes pause mid-conversation, staring into space as though listening to voices only he could hear. Most disturbing was his habit of referring to himself as 'we' when discussing medical decisions, though no other physician was present. His medical practice became increasingly unconventional, using treatment methods that had no basis in established medicine, yet proved.